of taxing on top of that. So I sort of thought it was a nice way of referencing that, you know, for example, in Canada, I talked to some people who were trained as veterinarians in the Philippines who were working as agricultural labor in the hog industry, and they were taking care of pigs. Now, can you imagine a local worker taking care of pigs, scrubs the pigs, does the physical labor? A vet does the physical labor, but they can also monitor the health of the pigs. So in that example, you see how a Philippine worker brings better value to that employer. So, all right, moving on. Going back to Canada's changing immigration policy, the Harper administration in power in 2008 comes into a situation where we have a first in, first out, a queue with our skilled worker migrant applications. And in fact, Jason Kenney, who I'll show you a slide of in a minute, Harper's Conservative government made radical cuts, very neoliberal cuts to every aspect of Canadian policy, but in particular transformed the immigration policy to a system that I've called and other people have called just-in-time immigration. And that notion of just-in-time follows the factory model, like you know, the car production or the clothing production just in time. You figure out a way to get your product to market to match exactly the labor demand. So the system just-in-time immigration that was brought in Canada is not called just-in-time, but it's all about time. It's all about the rapid bringing in of skilled workers to match labor in demand slots, but particularly relative to skilled workers. And there were some very, very major changes. There were a couple of moratoriums, again a time-based metaphor, suspending people while they restructured. People had been waiting for many years in a queue to get in, and then suddenly a moratorium's put on place, the queue stops. Then the next step is to release a whole lot of skilled occupations with a quota for each of them. So people have to scramble around and apply. Many people got lost from that. You know, they were supposed to get their money back. I think they all eventually did. Some made it through and over the line and some didn't, and some people had applied at the same time, and it was very confusing and caused a great deal of distress, as you can imagine, in the Philippines. So that system actually was modeled on Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand was very good at bringing people into labor slots, but the Canadian system is of course a lot more complicated, and Canada actually, you have to understand about Canada, very different than here. Canada needs immigrants, right? One of the reasons this guy and his party didn't get in again is because he did not respond well to the Syrian refugee crisis. And racist things were said by some of his MPs, and that was the end of him. And Canada actually has a lot of immigrants and wants immigrants, and the places in the country where there'd been suspicion about immigration, those sites now in regional markets like where I live on the East Coast and the Atlantic region, those things have changed because communities recognize they need immigrants of all kinds in order to survive. So there's been a rapid transformation relative to a sense of Canada's welcoming nature towards immigrants. Now, up to a point. Our current immigration minister is a Somali refugee, came to Canada as a refugee. He's our immigration minister, and we have a robust, the targets for immigration have been set at around 250,000 every year, and that was working pretty well. It was the level that all the governments, this one and the one before, had agreed upon. There was tolerance for this. It is majorly increased now because of this interest, but still working through. This is Jason Kenney, our Minister of Immigration, who moved from being the Minister of Immigration to being the Minister for Employment and Development. And he's linked, this is my class politics thing, these two portfolios under the Harper government. So first of all, we're going to bring in top talent, high skilled. He expanded the temporary foreign worker program to the point where more temporary foreign workers were arriving in Canada than permanent residents. This idea that they can go home was part of Kenny's idea. That was incredible and unprecedented. And then at the same time, because there was a desire to spread immigrants out over the country, Canada's provinces, one by one, over a period of time, were given immigration quotas. So we have a provincial immigration program in every part of the country now where they have quotas. They negotiate with the federal government. And under those immigration programs, they still have to meet the criteria for the federal level and be approved federally. But under those programs, there's possibilities for temporary workers to convert, okay? So Canadian immigration programming becomes incredibly complex, very fast. Back in the Philippines, people are trying to figure this out. And a lot of people figured out the system, again, time, express entry, how, they talked about this in the abstract. I heard them talk about it. Oh, you're going to put your CV in and you're going to swim in the pool and employers can get into the pool and pick you out and so on and so forth. And there are points awarded to different things. If you have Canadian experience, you get points. So international students and temporary foreign workers of a certain skill level are at a slight advantage. All right. So this system has not worked. There's a thing here on it wasn't working very well. Not enough people were coming in. So, they adjusted the points up and down, trying to make sure that they were getting to the quotas. This is an image from a Canadian, Tim Hortons. Have you heard of Tim Hortons? Una and I were discussing this. This is an iconic so-called Canadian brand right throughout the country. It was so important that Tim Hortons was taken to Afghanistan so that the troops could have their donuts and their double-doubles, it's called. I think double cream, double sugar. This is a very Canadian thing. I don't drink it myself. I think it's terrible stuff. But Canadians know it. They're double-double. And any Canadian knows about double-double. And they wear a uniform, and you can see the people in this image are all Filipino. It's a considered low skill, low wage, flexible employment, and it's the kind of employment that seniors do in terms of expanding their pension and students. But it's hard for franchised, it's hard for the employers to find people. So in different provinces, managers who work for Tim Hortons can transition to permanent residency. So I did some work in the Philippines working with a recruiter for Tim Hortons, and I met people and they all had management degrees. Moreover, I sat in a class with a bunch of these people who were learning French. They were Filipinos learning French so that they could be deployed to Quebec where there was some openings. So management degrees going to Quebec, hoping to become permanent over temporary. A lot of work and effort and planning goes into that. Meanwhile, Jason Kenney, this is a story. Jason Kenney wants to nudge workers in regional economies who are seasonal workers, who play into an insurance scheme and they draw insurance when they're unemployed. He wants to force them to be more mobile. He wants to force them to take employment further away from their home communities. So what happens is, in short, there's a tension set up between the temporary foreign worker employees and local workers, and it's a deliberately manufactured tension which is trying to nudge local workers into these crap jobs that are not enough to live on, but the temporary workers live on them because they work long hours and they're at the behest of the employer. They're just more vulnerable, they work harder, they do all kinds of things that local workers won't do, and the local workers aren't asked to do. So this tension comes up. So you have a class politics and clash going on between permanent and temporary that was manufactured back in the Philippines. That tall building is where I did my research. That's where the recruiter's office is. This is the statue of Mary. The site is called EDSA. It is a very, very famous symbolic site in the Philippines reflecting class politics. Over the road from, oh, that's just a little shot of people get trained by the recruiter in what, the Canadian currency. They're well prepared to come in. I'll go back to that later. So the EDSA site is where masses of people assembled to depose President Marcos in, I think it's 80, I've got my date. I mix up my dates here. So this is a historic site. Yeah, the statue of Mary was built to commemorate the People Power Revolutions, 1986. I was right in my head. Okay, and the second one was Joseph Estrada, 2001. So the Marcos government brought the troops to the EDSA site. People flocked to the EDSA site. And the troops, it was just touch and go. You go, there's a museum that tells the story there, and you're just on edge. But in the end, the troops refused. They joined the people, literally. They refused to fire on the Philippine people. So this is a very, very famous symbolic site. There's the statue of Mary looking down from the top. The church has been built underneath there. This building over here is the Philippine Overseas Employment Agency site. Every Filipino who's leaving the country as a mobile worker, a migrant worker, has to go there to get an exit visa. This is very unknown for Canadians. We don't have to get exit visas to leave the country, but it's part of the monitoring of the labour migrant, keeping track of numbers and so on, that I mentioned earlier has come in the firming up of a more robust migration policy. So this is a very symbolic site, and I think of it as ironic historically because it's where there was a revolutionary moment. And where have we come to today? We have come to a labour export country where people are leaving for deployment all over the world, in this circle of migrant remittances, which, deflects the kind of potential for transformation, economic transformation. We all know, maybe you don't know, but we have the president today in the Philippines. Have you heard of this? Right. Not a very pretty picture. Supported by migrants living abroad.